a relationship with life that I think lent itself so much more to love, and to expression, and to giving my all, irrespective of the outcome. And I think that's the really magical place that I would want everyone to get to in their journey of love, is that liberation, that I'm giving my all, not because of what I'm going to get from this situation. I'm giving my all because that's my truth, and I'm not going to withhold life from life. I'm not going to withhold my heart, in each moment.
Today we have Nicole Gibson with us. Nicole is one of the most amazing millennials I've ever come across in terms of her energy, her passion, and her drive in the space that she occupies. So from a very young age, she's had some challenges that she's overcome, but she's taken those challenges and she's transformed not just herself, but transformed the challenges into opportunities to help others along the way. So Nicole's going to just share with us something of her journey to date and how she's got here, where she is, and what she's going next in terms of resilience. So Nicole, it's great seeing you. Perhaps you can start by just sharing something, wherever you want to start, of yourself with our audience.
Oh, wow, that's a very it's an open invitation. Thank you, Johnson.
It's an open heart you've got, Nicole.
I try. Yeah, I think that's probably a really beautiful place to start. Why have I come to a point in my journey where I know the importance of having an open heart? Because I really do think that that's the fiercest, most significant journey we can ever walk. And what I've learned through working with such a diverse amount of people, and maybe later in the interview we can go into some of my work and how I've done that. But to summarize, had the privilege of facilitating tens of thousands, actually hundreds of thousands of people from so many different parts of the world in my journey through entrepreneurship and philosophizing and writing and speaking. I started to realize that that's actually what all of us are seeking. We just have different ways of trying to get there, and different behaviors, which can sometimes look really confusing on the outside. But the more I learned to listen, I really started to recognize that what we're actually all seeking is to have an open heart, because to have an open heart is to really be alive. And there's obviously a lot of vulnerability and risk in that, because when we're alive, we can feel the highs, but we can also feel the pain and the rejection and everything that comes with heartbreak. And yet the deepest, most innate, I think, impulse, because it's what we were created from, love, is to give love and to receive love. And I feel very blessed, because I feel like the earlier experiences I had, I really got to be confronted by the realities of not loving myself, and where that actually takes you. And through a 5-year battle with anorexia nervosa, sort of recognized that the epitome of what I think many people don't learn until they're 40 or 50, and they've spent their whole life thinking to themselves, I'll be happy when, and I'll be successful when, and I'll be good enough when. I got to experience that in a really condensed frame of several years through my adolescence, of being fixated on this end objective, where I was consistently rejecting my heart, and my self-love and my self-care and self-nourishment, and therefore what I was able to give life and what I was able to give the world. And I was an aspiring performer at the time, so in many ways I was passionate and driven, and I loved my artistry so much. But because my life was void of that love, I wasn't able to be present in any of it, and I wasn't able to make even the most amazing opportunities transpire into something actually material. And then being confronted, at the very pinnacle of crisis through that eating disorder, and recognizing that I had such firm beliefs that through that behavior that I was going to feel enough, and the world was going to show me that I was enough, to actually be thrown into the absolute opposite, which was feeling completely isolated, completely just helpless in that situation. I realized that we cannot live our life with this focus on an external objective, and that the journey of healing was to come back to love in each moment and recognizing the richness that exists when we live that way.
So within what you just said, the word that sticks out to me is that word love. And so you're talking about the awareness of a gap within you for something that's foundational. And at the same time, having what I think a lot of us have, this desire, this goal, this passion within that burns, and a direction. So there's a passion, there's gifting, there's what we can do, there's some way that we can go with it. But the foundational piece that's missing was the love piece. And I think that's what you're saying is somewhere along the line, through your condensed journey, you found that piece again. Mm. So that piece, I say it in two ways, the piece is in a piece, and the piece that is a piece. Just for people who have not got to that point and think, well, that condensation of awareness of there's something missing, there's something that's driving me, there's something that I'm good at, all of these things can feel very, very mixed up in that. So can you share how that was like for you, or what was your process to get from that spot?
Yeah, I mean, I did it in a way that I sort of worked to ensure that other people don't have to go through to find that very thing. Because I think fundamentally as humans, we can change in two ways, and there's a much more common way that we change. And that's when our back is completely against a wall and we have no other option but to surrender to change. And for me, that was the situation I found myself in, because my health was at such a point of crisis that I was basically confronted with two choices: to die for that eating disorder or to transform my life. But there was a power in that at the same time. And I think a lot of leaders that speak about their kind of defining moments, they talk about a rock bottom kind of pivotal moment in their life. And that period for me was mine, because I had to consciously choose life, you know. And I think a lot of people go through life and they never choose life. They're just living, they're existing. And it happened because one day they were born and they didn't really choose to be born, so they think, and then, you know, everything else is just happenstance. But for me, making that choice, I had to invest my heart, my life force into that choice. And it created a relationship with life that I think lent itself so much more to love, and to expression, and to giving my all, irrespective of the outcome. And I think that's the really magical place that I would want everyone to get to in their journey of love, is that liberation, that I'm giving my all, not because of what I'm going to get from this situation. I'm giving my all because that's my truth, you know, and I'm not going to withhold life from life. I'm not going to withhold my heart, you know, in each moment. But the other way of changing that I wish more people, more of us will get to as we evolve in our consciousness, is through inspiration, not needing to go to the deepest, darkest depths of suffering, you know, in order to realize, oh, wow, life's actually so beautiful and I don't have to suffer. And, you know, I think there's a gift in going to those dark places, but definitely it's not a requirement. It's just learning to be present to what is in each moment, and that love and that life force and that beauty and miraculousness, that's always there when we learn how to see it properly.
I think that's really true, that when you talk about what I hear from what you're saying is that it's coming to the point in where you're working from love, not for love. And
Yeah,
a lot of the times
I love that.
a lot of times we unconsciously just put the one foot in front of the other, the one foot in, and you keep going and you keep going and you keep going, hoping somewhere at our deepest level that there will be love, however we define it. And there
Yeah,
are many definitions and there are many false paths you can go down the road of,
yeah.
because the mirror to me it's like what the journey is sometimes walking through a desert, and they're mirages of what love could look like.
Good analogy. Yeah, I think that's so on point, working from love and not for love. And it's ultimately coming from that place of wholeness, that it's this higher mind, the wise mind that realizes what I'm seeking, is actually it's in me. And it sounds so cliche, but when you really understand that, also when you understand that the things or the people that you fall in love with, you're the perceiver of those things, and yet we don't often claim that in ourselves. We don't believe ourselves to be worthy enough to recognize that if I love you, if I see love in you, I am the one perceiving that love. It's a reflection of who I am as well. And to recognize what that means, which is no matter what you do, I don't lose that. Love isn't lost in that process. It's not about how you show up or anything external shows up. It's recognizing myself through my experiences. It's discovering, or I should probably say uncovering myself through each experience. That just means each experience you have, whether it's painful or it's filled with total elation, is a beautiful and sacred part of our experience here. And I think that's true freedom. It's not trying to protect yourself or protect your heart from the chance of pain. And I think this is why we don't live in our heart, is because we're scared. We're scared to be seen, we're scared to be rejected, we're scared to be judged, we're scared that we're going to be hurt in some way, abandoned. And that means that we would sort of unconsciously prefer to live this half life where I'm not giving everything, because then I can't have everything taken away. But what if you could realize that it can never actually be taken away? And I've even been reflecting more recently in my journey that actually those who I perceive to cause me the most pain, they're actually the catalyst for a deepening of my depth, and in them thinking that they're taking something from me or getting something from me, as long as I hold my presence and awareness, I actually gain dramatically from those experiences, because it's showing me how deeply I can love in those ways. But I think to hold that awareness is where the challenge is. That takes, I think, discipline, and it takes practice, and it takes commitment to hold self-awareness, because life can be so overwhelming, especially when emotions are involved and there's an open heart involved, whether that's the pursuit of a dream or, again, in relationships or family or whatever the circumstances may be, to really ask yourself, how do I feel? What do I see? To validate yourself in that creates such a beautiful foundation to live in that truth of wholeness, that realizing love can never be taken from me, because that's where I'm coming from.
That's really beautiful that you say that, because that sense of that there's something core within that is immutable, unshiftable, eternal, all of these words that are in there. And no matter what other clouds come along, be it bright or dark clouds, this piece that's in the middle, that can never be shifted. But like you say, it is a challenge when some of these dark clouds hang around for too long. Just to take it back to the start to where you are now, I get, for me anyway, at least, I'll tell you where I am with it, is that we can't do this on our own. There's a piece in this for me that says, I can't get to where, I didn't get to where I am on my own. So I'm part of a timeline, and there's a timeline that carries on beyond. But in terms of the starting, and people could be listening to, yeah, so you actually make it sound quite easy, Nick, because it's like, yeah, okay, there's all this love stuff inside. We can choose it, we can hold on to it, and it can sound really, deep and meaningful, or wishy-washy, or impossible. Again, people can choose whatever word you want to choose with it.
Yeah.
But it is hard sometimes. But can you speak to me of the help you've got along the way, whether it's from a person or from a situation, or that you can then reflect on, but that there's help that somewhere along the line has been useful for you?
Absolutely. I think that's important to talk about. And I'd also like to just create like a fine print for anyone listening that, it really does seem impossible until it's done, until you meet that part of yourself. Yeah. And I think like sometimes this can fall on deaf ears, but if you hear this message, and it triggers you in some way, it evokes like a strong emotional reaction of, oh, that's just rubbish, or it's not possible, or like that's something to look at. If it's evoking an emotion in you, if it's triggering something in you, that's an awareness for you, because often people that communicate this truth, they're communicating it in a very calm way. They've found that peace within them. There's no trigger in them. So if you're hearing this and there's that it evokes that in you, that's your awareness. That's actually a part of your path of what you need to look at. If it's skepticism, or it's defense, or it's an emotional reaction of some kind, be gentle with yourself in that. I definitely have been at points in my journey where people have spoken to me about love, and I've been like, honestly, you can F off. Like, it's just the last thing I want to hear right now, because it just feels so far away from where you are. And I think until that equation starts to balance of like, is the risk of what I'm going to have to feel and what I'm going to have to face, is the risk of that pain and that discomfort worth that peace? And I think this is often why humans wait until that rock bottom moment. Like, it wasn't like I was just in this awareness of love. Like I hated myself down to a point where I had to either open myself up to a different reality, or it was going to take my life. And so that was a very painful thing to confront. In fact, one of the most painful things to confront in that journey was I had no idea who I was going to be outside of that mental illness. I didn't know who I was. It was so defining to who I was that I was terrified that I wouldn't know myself if I was to journey in a direction of letting that go and becoming someone new, being renewed.
Yeah.
So that's really important for people to understand. And that there were many, and still are many, difficult, very confrontational, very triggering, very painful, deeply painful. Like, I've endured a lot of suffering through this process. And the thing that has kept me on my path is coming back to the question, do I want that truth inside of me and that peace inside of me more than not wanting to feel this pain? And because I've been in so much pain in my life, the desire in me to be at peace is so much greater now than what it takes to get there. And until that adjustment is made in your life, and the thing about life is it has this really beautiful and often very painful way of continually provoking that trigger in you and putting you in situations where you're in pain until a point that you decide that enough is enough, and until you decide, okay, now is the time for me to change. And working with people, I've also seen, I've seen what it does to a human being to be stubborn about this until the later parts of their life, and the suffering and the regret, and that, I think, in part has also really influenced me to want to face off with those really difficult things, because part of my deepest fear is to be 90 or 100 years old and to look back on my life and think that I chose stubbornness over the pursuit of truth and the pursuit of love.
That's really interesting in what you say. The first piece I grab hold of is the idea of, if anything that's said triggers, then that's almost like somebody knocking on the door going, hey, do you want to look at this? And yes. It's usually, if I take that analogy, it's almost like the police with a battering ram on your door. It's that intense, but you still have the ability to say, hey, no thanks, and we walk away. So a lot of the times, I think, where I come back to, I don't know what the percentage is, I don't know if anybody's ever done this sort of research, is sort of like, what percentage of us are just on the up and the down, but never hitting that rock bottom. And the rock bottom will be different for everybody. I get that. But unless you hit that point, you don't start to have an upward trajectory that is continuous, or at least gives you the possibility of an upward trajectory.
Yeah.
And that I think is the sad bit, because it needs the awareness piece, the reflective piece. And I think what you've said so far is, hey, there's the love bit that I hold on to so strongly. And that is one element of the journey, to say there's a love piece, but the ability to reflect, and to reflect in hard times, is based on the depth of your love.
Yeah, I really agree with that.
I think that's what I get from that. So in that respect, Nicole, where have you had external help along the way?
Yeah, so I think there's multiple aspects of this for me. I mean, in those places of rock bottom, I think anyone that's been there realizes, possibly for the first time, maybe not, that it feels very difficult without a sense of faith, and without a trust in something much bigger than you, that it's going to be possible. And I think that really, for me, was the beginnings of what has become a very spiritual pursuit in my life, that I was in many ways sort of meeting the grace of God, because I was so surrendered, and I was in so much pain, and in so many ways I felt so broken, but at the same time I was very real. I was very true, because I had nothing left to hide. The eating disorder, which sort of the best comparison, is an addiction. It is an addiction in many ways. It's a very compulsive, addictive behavior. Just not wanting it anymore, but simultaneously not knowing how to free myself from it. And so I think that those circumstances lent themselves to that meeting of divinity and grace. And for me, that I couldn't deny that in my path after that. And it reoriented me in a way that was extremely service driven, which is interesting, because in traditional mental health recovery, it's more about being insular and kind of selfish with your energy. And actually, after I started to have those experiences and learn that there was a love inside of me, I felt a natural overflow. And actually, like, I started to reflect on how a lot of the challenges that I had in my life were because I was too fixated on the self, and being less fixated on the self and my insecurities and my shortcomings and, you know, all these things about me, to see life, to be connected to that love inside of me, connected to that divinity inside of me, and to see life and want to give myself to it. That was such a pathway to freedom. So on a spiritual level, I had that guidance and support. And then on a human level, I had an incredible principal that really was kind of my first guardian angel, if you want to call him that. That's what it felt like, and sort of the least assuming person that you would think to sort of lean into what I was going through at that time. And for him, he had one of his previous students go through something similar, and he didn't intervene and support. And I think that made him make a decision after that happened, because of the trajectory that she ended up being on. Sort of, he made a decision in himself, if he was to ever see a student suffer in those ways, that he, no matter how difficult it felt or how vulnerable it was, he would do something about it. But he was, you know, a very Australian alpha guy, and the least likely, you know, anyone that knows Australian culture knows that it's not the most common thing for your typical Australian bloke to talk about feelings. But there he was, approaching me and saying, hey, I'd love to have a conversation with you. I was very visibly not well. But what I had dealt a lot with was just people kind of being so uncomfortable by that reality that they didn't know how to have a conversation with it about me. And he was there kind of being the first person to say, okay, this isn't comfortable, but I see you, come and talk to me about what you're going through. And he approached it in such an unconventional way. And it was because of that I was shown what I now believe true leadership is. And that was me going to his office and feeling so overwhelmed. I thought that I was going to be told off. You know, when you're in a bad place, and just the shame of what you're going through just sort of overtakes you. That's sort of the place that I was in myself. And I went and sat in the corner of his office because I couldn't even sit close to him on the other side of his desk. And I was sort of bracing myself because I thought he was going to yell at me. He was like the school principal, you know. And he just sat, he held a silence for what felt like a really long time. And it was probably not that long, but it felt like forever. And then he said the words, Nicole, I'm not here to tell you that there's anything wrong with what you're going through. I just want you to know that you're not alone. Such simple words, you know, so simple, but so transformative in my life. And actually what happened as a result of hearing those words, because no one had ever said something like that to me before, you know, because really the subtext of that was, I see you and you're okay. It's okay. What you're feeling is okay. You're okay. And I always felt like a burden, you know, I always felt like I wasn't okay. And then I was responsible for everyone else as well as myself, which was a lot to carry when I was in such a deep kind of process of suffering myself. And I think, by the way, we do that unconsciously all the time with the people in our lives that are in suffering. When we don't feel comfortable normalizing their pain, not only are they holding themselves in pain, they're feeling that hypervigilance of making sure that you don't feel uncomfortable because of the pain they're in. And as a result, they end up carrying all of that. And we don't do it consciously a lot of the time, but it happens a lot. We do that a lot. When we don't feel comfortable in ourselves, we unconsciously reject others. And that's why it's such a responsibility to love ourselves as well, so that we can hold a space of wholeness for others, no matter, like, unconditionality. But he was the first person that, you know, showed me that. And I ended up just crying and crying and crying because I actually felt safe to feel. And he just let me cry. And then he asked, you know what my favorite thing to do after school is? And I said no through my tears. And he said, my favorite thing to do after school is to have a beer. And I was pretty shocked by this. And then he got out a piece of paper. I was thinking to myself, like, what are you going to do now? And he got out a piece of paper and he wrote, I won't have a beer until you hit your weight target. And he signed it like a contract. He didn't mention that I clearly had an eating disorder. He didn't mention that I was mentally ill. He didn't mention any of that. That's all he wrote. I won't have a beer until you hit your weight target. And he signed it and he put it on the wall next to his desk. And I was just completely blown away by this. Like, why would someone sacrifice something that they loved for me in that way with so much grace, you know? And so I asked, because that's all I could think to say is, why would you do this for me? And he said, you know, Nicole, I'm never going to know what it's like to be in your shoes in this. But I do know what it's like to feel like I'm climbing an impossible mountain, and I know what it feels like to be alone. And so I just want you to know that you're not alone. And I truly got to experience what servant leadership was. I truly got to experience what it felt like to have someone be willing to be with me in my journey. You know, as you were saying, we can't do this alone. To really feel like someone was on my team and someone could put aside themselves and value what they saw in me enough, you know, because I didn't value myself enough in that time to see a potential in me that I couldn't see in myself, and to hold a light for that was entirely transformative. And sometimes when I tell that story, people think, you know, okay, overnight, magically, I just got better. Like, no, recovery was hard. I had a lot of work, years of work to do after that. And I had many amazing doctors, and none of them, though, were what he was to me in that, because they weren't meeting me in that humanity. They weren't meeting me in that love and that selflessness. And that's what gave me a sense of purpose and strength, you know, when the moments, and there were plenty of them, where I wanted to cheat my way in, and I wanted to lie and about what I had eaten, and I wanted to do all the things that were the opposite of what recovery looked like. I had plenty of moments in a day, let alone in a week, a month. And so in those moments, I needed a source of strength to be like, why am I doing this? You know, like, why am I, more than that, not just why am I doing this, why am I worthy of doing this? Why would I choose to love myself? And the fact that someone else had invested that in me often gave me strength to be like, well, my principal didn't need to sacrifice something he loved, but he did it because he thinks I'm worthy of that. And I drew on that a lot. So much so that it really moved me to want to share the power of love. When we love someone else with no condition and no expectation, because he didn't say, like, I expect you to hit your weight target by this date. He didn't, you know, there were no conditions around that. It could have been 3 months, it could have been 3 years. His commitment was saying, I believe in you. And whenever you get there, that's okay. Which was so different to how the medical system treats you. Yeah. The medical system says you need to gain this much weight every single week, and it needs to be in this way, and you know, and none of that healed me. In fact, a lot of the time it spiraled me in the opposite direction, because the pressure I felt was so immense. But the space he held, which was, I believe in you, I believe you're going to get there, and however long it takes you, it's okay. That's ironically the thing that actually quickened my healing journey.
Mm. It's there's a lot there that I think people listening or watching can take from it. I'm just going to throw a few points in as you've spoken. One is that sense of when you start to give out rather than it's all about me. And I actually say to people it's a paradox because it is actually all about me. But at the same time, it's not all about me. And it's a real paradox. And it's living with those paradoxes. And the more I go along, the more I see that it is a paradox because you give away something and it's not like here, I've got £10, I give it to you, I have nothing left. I give you this, and my coffers seem to swell, but it's not in terms of money. It's a depth of that love that refills from somewhere, whether it's this way down or it's inside out. What I don't have the words to describe it, but it's the direction of outwards brings it back inwards.
Yes.
So that's the first thing that comes to mind. The second thing is when I reflect on your journey, is that when you embark on this giving away the stuff, not is there only that I don't expect you, or there's an unconditional piece to it in terms of I'm not wanting it back, but there's no guarantee of success. So I can imagine myself of sitting down on the other side of this desk, talking to a young girl about the journey that she, or the outcome, whichever way you want to look at it, and say, well, I actually don't know whether this will succeed or not. And a lot of the times in life, there's always that risk of no idea if this is going to succeed. But the success is not measured in some way by the outcome. The success is measured by the journey in which you continue to journey with that uncertainty. But as we have been saying, from a place of love rather than for love. It's not for affirmation. It is from affirmation has nothing to do with it. So all the metrics that you have about, whatever it is you want to measure something, what's your bottom line? How do I measure this bottom line? Because there isn't a bottom line in this, because it's love, and it's very, very different way of measuring stuff. So it's really important, and it's beautiful to hear that story that you've had people along the way. There's a spiritual piece to this, but there's a piece of meeting somebody along the way, and meeting several people along the way, in which it empowers you to do the process. So I'm sure the medicalized world would say, yeah, you need to do 1, 2, 3, 4. These are the steps, and the steps are fine, because at the end of the day, I guess you still had to do the steps somewhere, or some form of steps. But the empowerment was some deeper. Is that the sense of I reflected on what you said?
Yeah, so much. I think that's so incredibly accurate. And by the way, you're so right that it's such a fundamental paradox, because it's the immeasurability, of giving. The way I see it is like we can't give what we don't have, but we're so concerned because we're outcome focused. If I give this, then I won't have it. But you can't give what you don't have. So the act of giving is having, and it's very hard for the human mind, which has been conditioned to see things as separate, and to see this and that, black and white, and here and there, and winning and losing, and all these other kind of dualities that we've been sort of that we've grown up with. That when it comes to the fundamental essence of understanding reality, to take it there, like the fabrics of reality, and how I've discovered consciousness actually works, that I sort of like a sort of more trivial example is I laugh now when someone flinches at like wanting to split the bill, because I know that by me just generously paying the bill, I'm actually the one that gets the the reward in that, you know, because my practice of abundance is just teaching me how abundant I truly am, that what I continually give, the more I give, the more I have. And that really is the truth. And it just, the fear doesn't allow us to connect to that and to believe in it enough and have faith in that enough to actually put it into practice. But if you start to put this into practice, you will see results yield immediately. You know, like we just need to first get over the fear. But what most people do when they feel like they don't have enough is become more conservative in their giving. And, you know, I had to learn this again, like in a very kind of extreme way. I felt like I had nothing. I didn't even have, you know, I was so fragile, physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally. I felt like I had nothing to give. But it was when I realized that I needed to give, to have more, that my life started to change. And there really is no separation between those things. And that person that contracts at the thought of paying the bill is because they're communicating to life, I don't have enough. And so life says, okay, you don't have enough. All right, I'm going to continually reinforce that again and again and again. But if you show up differently in that, even because I had this revelation at that young age, when I started my entrepreneurial journey, and I would take mentors or people that I admired to lunch, even though they were twice, sometimes three times my age and doing way better than me, I was always the first to pay the bill. And I really believe that that's contributed to my success. I really believe that that was foundational for me to get to where I am, because my practice of that just consistently, I was breaking through those limitations of like, it's belief, you know, yeah, maybe my part-time job earning $15 an hour at the cafe doesn't make it seem like I can afford this, but I value this and I choose this, and I'm going to trust that if I invest in this direction, I'm going to have more of that in my life and less of working at a cafe. And that's always been true. The more I've invested, and I'm using money because it's what people connect to, you know, in a more conventional way, but it's love, it's emotion, it's all of your energy. The more you give and the less you withhold in the directions you want, the more you will have those things. And people ask me all the time about this in context of relationship when they don't have the relationship they want. The first thing you've got to ask yourself is, how willing are you to not withhold your love, irrespective of what that person chooses? Because until you're willing to be that vulnerable, someone's not going to meet you in that. And that is the most confronting reality, I think, for so many people. It's the same with the pursuit of a dream. What if it doesn't work? Well, what if it doesn't work? Is that okay? Can you be okay with that? But the real like kind of irony in it is, as soon as you're okay with it, the same moment that it will really start to work, because you're working through power and not through force.
Yeah, that's amazing. In terms of what you said there, when you talk about, I love it when you say, okay, well, I'm earning whatever I'm earning is pittance in real terms, but I'm being generous when I don't need to be generous. I'm demonstrating a mindset of abundance. So a lot of times I can think, yeah, the world is full of abundance. Fantastic. Oh, I'm such a generous person. And then, hold on, but is there an action that follows from this? Is there an action that demonstrates what I think in my head is actually becoming a reality in the world? So it's outside of what, and so I love that example you give of saying, yeah. And as you start to do this, it creates its own direction in terms of refilling that well again. I firmly believe, as we will come on to, is wherever you are at this point in your life in terms of your material success journey or any other way you want to measure your success, is that as you keep moving in a direction, it is having to keep giving.
Yes.
To keep being generous. Would that be about right?
100%. Think about it this way, because I think people need to identify the contradiction, and how, because they'll blame life for it not showing up the way, that they want to. But think about the most abundant person that you aspire to be like, and ask yourself, how do they show up? How do they show up in life? Are they always the first to pay the bill? Are they, not even concerned about how much they have because they know they always have enough, and the behaviors and the actions that follow that, versus this mindset that many get stuck in, which is I don't have enough. So in order to be like that person I want to be like, I have to give less so that I can save and be more like them. And it's a lot of people go through their whole lives, and I think there's so many belief systems that we've been sort of saturated by, like, my favorite one that I find the funniest in business is you can only grow your business by 10% a year. Really? So some of the highest performing entrepreneurs in the world are consistently aiming year on year to 10x their business. That's their mindset, and they do it, And so to have this mindset of we can only do that, we can only just challenge that, because it's not the truth. And the more we live that way, the less we actually meet the true potential that exists within us, which is exponential. As long as you decide and you have the conviction to follow through with your actions, it's, it can be like it took a while for me to have the conviction to really say this to my audiences, because it can feel like a big risk to even say this to someone, but you will succeed. If you show up that way, there isn't a risk. Success, the fine print is success might not look the way you thought it would look. And it might not be linear, but everything that you invest will come back to you in some way. And so it's never lost. And if you can be still, and I think this is where like your own practice, whatever that is for you, is really important, because it's the stillness of when the path seems rocky, that you're like, it's not working. But rather than being absorbed into that stress, you can just come back and be like, okay, I've set an intention for what I'm wanting to experience and actualize and create in my life. Life is now initiating me. It's showing me through this turbulence who I have to become. It's showing me where my incongruencies are. It's showing me where I'm yet to take responsibility. It's showing me where I'm not humble enough yet. It's showing me where I can be destabilized. It's actually showing you those things for you, for your expansion and growth. And if you can really get that and be still in amongst those lessons, although they can be very chaotic, you will get the lessons faster and faster. And actually the path will become more and more peaceful the more you practice that.
So in the sense of what you're saying, you're saying to me, but hold on, Nicole, life is full of all of this stuff's going on, and you're telling me to be still because that's the path to growing. And the back of that is the sense of, okay, most of us are so action orientated for whatever reason, and there are loads of reasons to be action orientated. And there's a part of being who you are. And you're saying, well, okay, so in the middle of all this, what seems like chaos, there is something in life that's saying, who are you going to become? Who are you being? Who are you now? And how are you be developing rather than do? So rather than the doing piece, let's look at the being piece at the same time as the doing piece is still going on, because life is still going on.
Yes. But so, where are you doing from? Because that allows.
Yeah, that's really good. Where are you doing from?
yeah, and that action, like the inspired action, which is like feeling like viscerally, maybe this will help someone that's still learning this. Viscerally, for me, it's very hard at this point in my journey to get me to move unless I feel compelled to move. So I need to feel like something's actually pulling me towards it. And I need to viscerally feel like, yes, there's an energy here, which is pulling me closer to my initiation, to the person I want to become. The days where I would do things just because, I felt bad about not doing it, or I was people pleasing, or, like I thought I had to do that just because that's what other people told me I had to do. Like, I think school and uni is such a magnifying glass for this. Like, how many hours, for those of you that studied at uni, would you sit in the library? Like, I used to remember watching kids study. I only lasted a few months at uni before I was off being an entrepreneur, because I couldn't handle it. Like, I couldn't handle the waste of time that people would sit in a library for hours and hours and hours and talk about how much they study, but they would actually only study properly for 30 minutes out of the 10 hours that they would sit there. But most people live their whole life like this. Like, I've also been an entrepreneur at a big organization in Australia, and that was the only kind of time that I was not running my own business. And it was only a few months, and just watching how their staff worked, and just thinking to myself, like, you get up, you go to work, you stay in the office for 10 hours, you go home and you go to sleep and do it again. But all you're really doing in a day is maybe 1 or 2 hours of work, that, like, my version of work, that if I was to get up, train, do some breath work, meditate, pray, feel awesome, feel inspired, do what I want to do, call someone I love, put myself in a state of joy, I could do the work that took you 10 hours in 30 minutes. And I'm having a much more fulfilled life. So how many things do you do just because you feel like you need to do that, and you're not actually putting your vibration first? Like, one of the things that I like to remind people is what you're creating is where you're creating from. So what is the state that you're creating from? And if you can master that first, creation does become a process of allowance and inspired action.
So would you say, just on that last point, that's just interesting, that the point in the present that you're creating from, whatever your project is, whatever your business is, for you has to come from it almost sounds spiritual, where you say that there's this thing that pulls, there's a pull, and I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, that it's not a mental kind of process. It comes from somewhere deeper down. Whether it's love in action, whether it's something else, I let you define it, but one comes from a depth that is far beyond. And so from that space, all the other, whether it be ideas or offshoots or whatever else that needs to come together to bring the whole thing together, starts from that core. Is that kind of right? That it's a deeper place?
Absolutely. And I really believe that exists in everyone, that whether you want to call it your personal destiny or fate, whether you want to call it aligning your free will with God's will, if you want to call it love in action, I love that term. I use that term often. To be inspired, for an artist to be a channel. Like, think about musicians coming together and one musician beginning to play a riff, and then the drummer joining in, and then all the other musicians starting to riff. Like, it's not an analytical process. It's a state of flow. And then the most beautiful art is created in that space, and all of us have access to that. But we need to love ourselves, like, to bring this full circle, we need to love ourselves enough to believe that we're worthy of a life that can feel like that. And this is where our programming can get in the way so much, because we've been taught since we were yay high, you've got to work really hard. And, you know, if you don't work really hard and you don't grind and you don't do these things, then you're not going to be successful. But honestly, go and make friends with people that are mega successful in your eyes. You'll see that they have a way of being. Like, yes, they work hard, but generally the way that they show up is not the way that you were taught successful people were going to show up. They have an air of self-love, confidence, self-assurance, you know, that allows them to believe they're worthy of a good life and a joyful life. And you are as well, you know, but we've got to get out of our own way, and find that deeper part of us that actually, like, I sort of conceptualize it as, I already know the path. I'm just remembering the path. Every step of the way, I've got to ask myself, like, is this the remembrance? Does this feel like it resonates as truth for me? And if it doesn't, yeah, there are a lot of moments, like being a young entrepreneur, where I'm confronted with an investor, or I'm confronted with a partner, I'm confronted with a client, I'm confronted with a consumer of something I've created who's you know, expecting things of me. And it can feel hard for me to be like, actually, this is my truth, and let go of how they react to that. And I've had times where I've really failed at that, and I've yielded to someone else's expectation of me. But I can tell you what, that those lessons were very painful, and they've taught me that it's not worth it, because it doesn't improve your life, and it actually doesn't improve their life either. When someone's trying to get something from you by getting you to yield to what is actually true for you, it's a very confined, in a way, it's like an energetic prison. And when you think about how many organizations are structured, you know, how many relationships in general are structured, it is that power dynamic. And yet there's a whole universe outside that matrix that is so much more prosperous and so much more beautiful. But yeah, you've got to learn to have that conviction and self-love in your own heart, you know, to start showing up in the world like that.
I think in terms of the way I process what you just said, is it's the part of discerning. So you've got something at the core, and as you walk along, let's say in terms of where you're at, you're meeting investor, and they're saying, well, we need you to do 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, or these are our requirements. And it might be something inside that goes, yeah, that's right. And then something, you hit this blockage and say, no, that's not right, or it doesn't feel right. And it's discerning enough to say, hey, we can't go that way. It's nice to meet you, you know, see you later. But that comes with coming back to the idea of what's the core, is that if I give this up, and you know, you need an investor somewhere for this dream to become a reality. And yeah, you're saying, well, hold on, it's you. Those are the tussles I hear that are going on underneath. That it has to be a sense of rightness, of discerning it, and having courage. I don't know if courage is the right word, but it's the ability to step back from and say, it doesn't align with the core piece inside. Speak to us a little bit about that in some depth.
I think that's really beautifully put and really accurate. And as well as knowing this, also have grace that you will get it wrong at times, you know, to have a wise mind, you know, and a pure heart in every single situation. That's like, it's expecting perfection of yourself. So how do you mitigate the fact that none of us are perfect? I think that's got to come back to consistent self-reflection. Have a practice that really, like, asks you to be present with yourself. It's really important, especially if you want to go and do exceptional things in the world, because the more successful you become, the more people want things from you, and the more people want things from you, the harder it can be, unless you have that to hold your own, hold your own energy, hold your own value, hold your own worth. When you start having people tell you this is who you are, you've got to remember who you are in that, and you've got to make a decision on who you want to be in that as well. And so I think as well, like, I've been in situations where I've chosen against that wise mind and against my truth. And then I've felt like I didn't know how to get out of it. And really, like, that feeling was, I feel so stifled at the thought of the confrontation. And so I haven't confronted it for periods of time, and it always gets worse, and I think when you really learn that, there's no getting out of it. When you know that you've betrayed yourself, you've got to own it, and you've got to find the strength, whatever that takes, whether that's asking other people around you to be that point of accountability and support, getting a coach, going to therapy. Like, if you need that external support, that's okay. I've had, situations where I've needed to put 2 coaches and a therapist around me just to give me the space to develop enough security in me to handle that confrontation. And I invested in that because I could see the trajectory of not making that change. And so if you need that additional support, that's okay. And also then, when it is done and you have gone through that discomfort, really you take the time to write down, okay, this is what I learned, and I think that process of learning, like now, because of some of those experiences, I am so like unwavering and almost like ruthless. Especially it surprises sometimes advisors and investors how I am now when it comes to investor relationships, because it could be easy to look at me and be like, well, you're a young founder, kind of like know your place. But I've really had to work for this discernment, and I cannot be bought. You cannot buy me. But the irony in that is it attracts the dream investor anyway. When you have that conviction, when you show up in that way, the right people who truly want your best, and want your success will meet you in that.
No, that's fantastic. Nicole, just as we come down towards the end of our time together, is there anything that you would like to share that we've not talked about to date?
I think this has been such an amazing conversation. I guess, like, to summarize all the points that we've touched on, for anyone that is listening, that you're stuck maybe in a place where you are expecting that perfection of yourself. If you cannot show up in this perfect way, then you either don't try, or you put tremendous amounts of pressure on yourself, and cause yourself to get sick because of that pressure. Just please know that this whole conversation and life in general is trying to show us that it's a journey. And if you can let go, and this is coming from someone that was my deepest battle, was the desire to be perfect based on this outcome I had in my mind. I really get that pain, and it can show up in very subtle ways. Even now, I've got to really watch it. Anything that's trying to be a thief of my presence, anything that's trying to be a thief of my enoughness, anything that's trying to be a thief of, this life in some way, and who I am right now, irrespective of my fuck ups, and there are plenty, sorry for swearing, my mistakes, that's that regardless of all of those things, I'm human, and it's created a depth in me, and I'm still worthy. That doesn't mean I can excuse behavior that's out of integrity. It's just understanding that self-compassion is the pathway for expansion. The more I can meet those parts of me that have messed up with love and with compassion, the less I'm likely to do that, because the easier it is for me to learn and to show up better in each moment. And that's all you can expect of yourself. So please know that everything we've talked about is possible, and it's also a journey, and to have grace with yourself in that.
That's a great summary, Nicole. I would just add to that that is truly what living in the present is, but with the total acceptance of all of our history and all of where we are, would desire to go in the future, and all the faults and all the stuff that we wish wasn't there, but the full acceptance of the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah.
The young and the old, or any other thing that would want to throw you in a negative tailspin. You say, yeah, okay, you can try and move me, but I'm not moving, because it's all in there. And when I show up with all of it. I may not show you, I might, well, actually, I don't think I combed my hair today, or maybe I didn't shave, but I did have a shower. But we won't go down the personal hygiene route. But whatever it is, it is. And when we learn to accept that is where I am at present, which is even better. Where I am, we can be. And if I'm not here, then we can't be, or it's not fully in that space.
Yeah.
Nicole, we will no doubt meet again. It's been great having this chat with you. Perhaps you can tell some of our audience where they find you, what some of touch points are on the digital space.
Absolutely. I think there's pretty much on all platforms, but if you go to my Instagram, Nick Gibson, Gibson, then you're gonna find me on all other platforms. So just yeah, that would be like my first point of call.
Fantastic. It's been great chatting. And we will see each other soon. Take care.
Yeah. Much love, Johnson.